Hey guys, we're here for video 3 of the upper extremity, doing the next set of 4 muscles, what I call the big shoulder movers. And 3 of them are big, one of them is not. So this is really the shoulder movers that are not the rotator cuff. So the 4 muscles that I picked. And so let's just jump into today. We're going to talk about some muscle overview again, bones and landmarks that you need to know, the 4 muscles that we're building, origin, insertion, action, and 2 joints with some joint pathology. So let's jump in. So again, last time we covered the rotator cuff. Today we're covering the trapezius, the deltoid. We're going to do the pec major on the front. We're going to do the rhomboids on the back. So those 3 are 1, 2, 3, 3 shoulder movers we're going to do today. On the front, we're going to do the pec major, pectoralis major. So those are the 4 muscles for today. Again, the rhyme applies. My cheesy rhyme. Muscles of the shoulder help you move a boulder. 4 lock your humerus down. Supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis are the 4 rotator cuff muscles. And then today we're going to learn about 1 that pushes you off the ground, the pectoralis major, the bully that moves the humerus all around, which is your deltoid, the mirror image of the deltoid, which is kind of like your trap, and your rhomboids. Both of those pull your scapula back. All 8 of them help keep your shoulder on track. Yeah, pretty dorky. So again, this is the answer key. You guys will have this. I'll pass this out in class on Wednesday, so you guys know all of the origin insertion actions I want you to know. When you go and look this stuff up online, sometimes they'll give you different origin insertions and actions, and so these are the ones I'm holding you to, if you will. I'm having to simplify some stuff sometimes. I want to complicate things when it's useful other times. So this is your master list. Randomly, here's my daughters. Do you remember their names? I challenge you. They were throwing leaves up, getting some good pictures. I love Enika's smile in the background while Florence is throwing leaves. So some bony landmarks, guys, of the day that you need to know. Quick review of the axial skeleton. We'll talk about the cervical spine, a little bit of the thoracic spine. When we talk about the rhomboids and the traps. Really important landmarks. There are the spine of the scapula here in the acromion process. This is a big springboard section of your scapula. So this acromion process is here. Goes into the lateral third of your clavicle, the medial third of your clavicle, the sternum, some ribs down here we'll talk about as origins. We'll also talk about the crest of the greater tubercle of the humerus. We'll talk about the medial or vertebral border of the scapula on the side. And I think that's the majority of the origin insertions actions. And again, the crest of the greater tubercle will be along here. The deltoid tuberosity, you can imagine which muscle might attach there, might insert there. So we'll talk about the deltoid tuberosity. And those are most of the bony landmarks you need to know for this video. So jumping into the first muscle, guys, the rhomboids. The rhomboids are on the back, medial to your shoulder blade. So there's a couple visuals. Here's a visual of the origins on the cervical and thoracic spine, and the insertion on this vertebral or medial border of your scapula. You actually see these fibers come down. Ignore this top part right here. So ignore this part. But you see your rhomboid minor, rhomboid major. I'm just going to call them the rhomboids together to simplify this thing. And again, they attach on the cervical spine, or originate on the cervical spine and the thoracic spine, and they insert onto this medial or vertebral border. What you can imagine they do, since they're angled up like this and the insertion always moves towards the origin, is that they retract the scapula back and they do a little bit of elevation at the same time. So rhomboids are involved in both retraction and elevation, and eccentric control of the opposite of protraction and depression. I'm going to focus on the concentric actions here for the rhomboids, but there's always that eccentric action. So one thing to maybe add to the rhomboids to this master list is that the cervical spine is an origin site, but so is the thoracic spine. So there's a few thoracic spine that I'd maybe add here. Okay, moving on to muscle number 2 is the trapezius. Trapezius is a really important shoulder muscle. A lot of guys and gals like to build up their trapezius up here, up top, to get really muscular shoulders. It's really, though, not just this top portion, but there's actually a really broad middle and lower section too. We call these sections the descending, transverse, and ascending sections of your trapezius muscle. The descending meaning from the origin to the insertion down. So descending, this top section is descending from the origin to the insertion. This middle section is transverse, kind of like a transverse plane, cross-section plane. So kind of horizontal from the origin to insertion. And then you have this ascending section from origin to insertion down the bottom. My muscle key, guys, is set up appropriately 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3 to kind of show those 1, 2, 3 descending, transverse, ascending sections. So you find the descending section, guys, originate on the occipital bone and the cervical spine, and it inserts down onto the lateral third of your clavicle. The transverse section actually inserts down onto the acromion process, and the ascending portion inserts down onto to the spine of your scapula. So it almost creates a U shape from the lateral third of the clavicle to the acromion process, all the way back to the spine of the scapula. It creates a U shape around that shoulder for the insertion points. So transverse originates on the thoracic spine, inserts onto the acromion process. Ascending originates on the thoracic spine, inserts onto the spine of the scapula. The muscles, there's a lot of words here, but this is fairly self-explanatory. If you see the striations, they always move towards the origin. I can tell that this descending portion will retract my scapula and elevate it a bit. So it retracts and elevates just like the rhomboids. The transverse section here, these horizontal fibers just retract my scapula back. And the ascending portion retracts and depresses my scapula. So those are the functions of the trapezius. Okay, guys, so moving on to the third muscle, the deltoid muscle. In the rap that I have, I call this the bully because the deltoid does pretty much everything. I'm going to have you guys know a few of its functions, but just know that it pretty much has all of the functions. I try and give you the main function for each of the main portions of this muscle. So the deltoid, guys, is kind of like a mirror of the trapezius. If the trapezius inserts down onto the lateral third of the clavicle, the acromion process, and the spine of the scapula, the deltoid originates there. So it's almost like there's a little gap, a little bony gap, and it's almost like the same muscle kind of jumps off of the same bony processes, and that's the deltoid. So the deltoid, guys, has these anterior fibers that originate on the lateral third of the clavicle. You guys see in orange here. And that inserts down onto this deltoid tuberosity. It has the same insertion point for all three parts of the deltoid. This middle portion originates on the acromion process, right on the edge of the shoulder, and inserts down to the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. And then the posterior portion originates on the spine of the scapula, and that also inserts down onto the deltoid tuberosity. The anterior portion, guys, the clavicle part. Think through with me with the deltoid. If it originates here and inserts there, and it were to pull and get shorter, I'm actually going to pull my arm into internal rotation. So the clavicular portion, that anterior portion, is going to do internal rotation primarily. The second portion, acromion process, the deltoid originates here, inserts down into that deltoid tuberosity. When it pulls and gets shorter, it moves my humerus up into abduction. So that's the primary motion there. And then that back portion, spine of the scapula, is like the opposite of the clavicular portion. So the spine of the scapular origin, the posterior part, when it pulls and gets shorter, it pulls the arm into exterior or external rotation. And that's what you find here. So those are the three main functions of the deltoid. I like this picture a lot here. It shows the three origin points and then one insertion. But really, it's a gigantic muscle. And some of you guys will want to build gigantic deltoid muscles, but you don't have to. Fourth muscle, guys, last one, is the pectoralis major, the pec, on the anterior portion of the chest. This is the most superficial and very thick muscle on your chest. There are also three origin points for the pec, and I'm just going to talk about the actions together. So you have the medial third of the clavicle, you have the sternum, and you have an origin on the costal cartilage of your ribs right here. They all insert onto this crest of the greater tubercle, and they actually kind of flip, which is really, really neat. This is a strong adductor, and it can actually act as an extender also. But as your arm raises up, what you guys see, these muscle fibers that are overlapped, as your arm raises up, those muscle fibers actually flatten out, so there's no overlap. And so it actually is a powerful extender until about here, and then it stops being a good extender. So clavicle, medial third of the clavicle, sternum, ribs are the origin points. One insertion point on the crest of the greater tubercle of the humerus. Again, its actions. When somebody is doing a lot of bench press, they are building up their pecs into big, massive muscles on their chest. So imagine with me, guys, that my humerus is going this way into flexion. A bench press is basically doing the same thing with my humerus. So your pec majors flex the glenohumeral joint. They also adduct it. So as my arm's in abduction, this pec major is also powerfully adducting. You actually feel your pec major engage into adduction when you do that. You can feel engage when you flex your humerus in a push-up. And it also internally rotates. Since it's on the inside, originating here, inserting there, it is also an internal rotator of the humerus. So now you guys know these three. Again, even though there's more, those are the three I want you to know. Here's a picture at a Reformation Day celebration of the Protestant Reformation in my church. This is my daughter Enika, my daughter Flo in the back. Just a funny little dorky expression she has on her face. A lot of blonde hair. Some of their best friends at our church are very, very dark haired, very different. This is a poster I did for my Sunday school class on the 5 solas of the Reformation. So you guys are welcome to Google search what the heck that means. Okay, last two things, guys. Two joints of the day. I have less pathology on this day, but I have 2 joints I want to talk about. One is the sternoclavicular joint here, and one is the acromioclavicular joint here. So let's jump into the SC joint. This is a synovial joint, a plane joint. It has some rotation, some gliding. I don't want you to know all those motions. Just know it's a plane joint, a synovial joint. It articulates, guys, between your sternum and your clavicle. So those are the 2 bones that are articulated at this joint. And again, you can feel your SC joint disappear as you move into horizontal adduction. So as you do this, you can actually feel that clavicle kind of recede into that joint. This is stabilized by a couple of ligaments, and this is the hardest part of this joint, is to memorize these. The first set of ligaments that stabilizes the SC joint are the sternoclavicular ligaments, which are actually pretty easy to name. So the SC joint is stabilized by the SC ligaments. There's some on this anterior portion here that I've highlighted in purple. There's also a posterior portion in the back. Another set, guys, is the costoclavicular ligaments, which are a set of ligaments you can't see very well in this picture, but they are ligaments between your clavicle and your first rib. Costo means rib. That root is rooted in the rib, if you will. So Costo, one way to remember this is I buy my ribs at Costco. So you think Costo, and you can think, oh, that means rib. So costoclavicular, this means something between the ribs and the clavicle. There's a set of ligaments here and on the other side. And there's also an interclavicular ligament that are actually resting above your manubrium in your sternum, ligaments that kind of go in this valley and attach clavicle to clavicle. So those 3 stabilize and give this joint incredible stability. But the fact remains that you do injure this joint. There is joint dislocation where you tear through these ligaments. 2 types of joint dislocation on your SC joints is anterior and posterior. I want you to think with me real quick which type you would rather have. So between an anterior dislocation and a posterior dislocation, the worst of the 2 definitely is the posterior dislocation, where you actually have your clavicle dislocating, tearing through those ligaments and receding into your thoracic cavity, possibly puncturing your trachea, your esophagus, some arteries that are directly behind your clavicle are a whole bunch of arteries and veins and nerves, and this can create some damage. Not as bad as when you actually fracture your clavicle and those bony fractured parts are puncturing through those vessels, but there's still a lot of risk if you dislocate this SC joint. Okay, guys, second joint of the day, last thing we're doing today is the AC joint, the acromioclavicular joint between your acromion process and your clavicle. So the AC joint. This is also a plane joint that's synovial. It's an articulation, guys, between your clavicle and your scapula. So the acromion process on your scapula and your clavicle, AC. This is also stabilized by 3 ligaments, I want you to know. Again, this is aptly named AC ligament. Acromioclavicular ligament is seen in green right here. And your coracoclavicular ligament is really a combination of 2 different ligaments. And this is between your coracoid process and your clavicle. So coracoclavicular. The coracoid process is actually a really tender section of your humerus right here. Your acromion process is here. Your coracoid process is right there. If you dig your fingers in, you'll be kind of sensitive because you have a lot of muscle and tendon attachments there. So the coracoclavicular ligament is made of the conoid and trapezoid. The trapezoid is more lateral. The conoid is more medial. And those two ligaments help stabilize that joint tremendously. So a really common injury, if I dislocate my shoulder, guys, I say I have a dislocated shoulder. I'm talking about my glenohumeral joint. But if I say I have a separated shoulder, I have shoulder separation. What I'm talking about is not my glenohumeral joint, but my AC joint. So this is really common in physical therapy and athletic training. Separated shoulder, dislocated shoulder, or subluxed shoulder. So a separated shoulder has three types, and they're all called TOSIs. So TOSI 1, TOSI 2, TOSI 3 makes me think like an English person. You tosser. So TOSI 1, TOSI 2, TOSI 3. TOSI 3 being the worst, TOSI 1 being the most mild. So the TOSI types are seen here, guys. TOSI 1 is a partial sprain, not strain. We talk about strain when we talk about muscle or tendon. When we talk about a ligament, we're talking about a sprain. So you can sprain your ligament, you strain your muscle or tendon. So a partial strain of any three of those ligaments, the AC ligament or your trapezoid or your conoid ligaments. So a partial strain, a partial loosening, you have some irritation, pain, but you haven't actually really done a complete sprain, a tear. A TOSI 2 is slightly more severe. If you guys see in this picture that your AC ligament has been fully sprained, completely torn, and your trapezoid and conoid ligaments are just partially sprained. And a TOSI 3 is a complete sprain, a complete tear of all three ligament types. So if you guys see in this picture with me, can you guys guess his left shoulder here, what kind of TOSI it is? And when I first looked at this picture, my thought was TOSI 2, because I saw the elevation here, and I thought that was within reason for a TOSI 2. But then I saw a separation, guys, between the coracoid process and your clavicle, and there's a huge separation there. I'm thinking there must be a complete sprain of your trapezoid and conoid ligaments, your coracoclavicular ligament here. So I'm guessing this is a TOSI 3 just from the x-ray. I'm not a medical professional, though. Okay, so guys, that is it for the day's learning. I would pause the video now and review especially the four muscles we built today. We built the deltoid, or we're going to build on Thursday, the deltoid, the trap, the pec major, and the rhomboids. So I would review their origin, insertion, and actions. See you guys.